Hello and welcome back everyone. It looks like some big things have happened while I was away, with Wyrd releasing a brand new FAQ, Errata, and Fields of Glory document, so let's go over what's changed. Let's start with the FAQ, which has had one really nice change that might be easy to miss. They changed the numbering system. Instead of a single list that went from 1 to 41, now the numbers restart in each category. Anyways, onto the things I'm sure most of you are a bit more excited about, the 10 new FAQs. These 6 on screen now I'm going to skip, since they're just confirming that the rules as written are how they should work, and there are things that I've seen players mostly play right anyways. These are General number 16, Specific Abilities numbers 2 and 3, Abyssinia number 2, King's Empire number 2, and Court of 2 number 1. The first fact that changes how most people were playing is Terrain number 4, which says the difficult and hazardous terrain traits stack. So, if you rush through a tide pool when the enemy storm sirens in glory, instead of a hazardous 3 hit, you're taking a hazardous 5 one. That's 3 plus difficults 2. Another one that isn't how most folks I saw play doing things is Combined Arms number 4, which says that units with a Titan Combined Arms has to fully deploy in the Titan deployment step, which is a small nerf to Abyssinia's Mechanized Infantry and Steel Legion. Three Kingdoms' number 1 is actually really spicy. This says that if you have a copy of Steel Battle Plans in hand and gain another copy, you get to use it to copy your choice of a different or the same stratagem and hold both in your hand. This should really scare players who like to use really strong stratagems that don't go back to your stratagem deck after use, as Rio's players can potentially use it several times while you're stuck with it just once. Command number 1 is technically just confirming the Calamity Incarnate's rules as written are how they're intended, but since it's a fairly new unit, I'm covering it separate from those first 6. This explains that Calamity Incarnate affects all duels where at least one enemy fireteam in the duel is in range, whether the Tatarigami is part of that duel or not. This makes the Titan much more annoying for opponents with a lot of support actions, as they can run into range just to interfere. So the FAQ gave us some interesting things, but the Erratas were the real excitement sat. This time around the major changes are to Abyssinia, King's Empire, and Hazardous Terrain. Let's start with Abyssinia, who got mostly nerfs but with a few interesting buffs too. As a quick recap, Abyssinia used to be the card draw allegiance, but now their card draw is more limited, and in exchange they have a more elite fate deck than anyone else. So let's get into how they did that. Starting with their Allegiance card, their universal trigger Radio In Enemy Movements now has you draw your choice of any card with the value of 5 or lower from your discard pile. This doesn't change the quantity of cards drawn, but it significantly limits the quality of those you draw. They also lost the Soulstone powered ability in exchange for Machine Precision, which makes it so you never have an ace in your deck. If an ace would ever go back into your deck, it's instantly discarded again, giving you a more elite 50 card deck compared to everyone else's 54 cards. This basically means that Abyssinia has a flat +1 to their average value on cards drawn or flipped compared to anyone else. Soulstone Powered was a very minor effect, so this exchange is definitely a buff. For the same toning down card draw reason, their Adjunct now has you draw a card when the model is killed, rather than when its unit activates. In theory, this can give you even more card draw than before, but it takes more work to pull off, which seems fair. The next big change is nerfing the Mechanized Infantry down from easily the best unit in the game to only a pretty good one. A ton changed on the card, so honestly it's probably best to forget what they had before and look only at the new card. Generally speaking though, they went from good to great at everything to being much more focused on being backline gunners. They cost 9 script now, had some AV nerfs, and salvage parts is now on both sides, but tracer rounds is glory only. In my opinion, the biggest change on them though is to tracer rounds. It now gives +1 AV on missed shots. This is funnily both a buff and a nerf, so let's go over that. First, this is how tracer rounds used to work. +1 on any shot, but only other fire teams would benefit. So ideally, you would have one shoot, then the next shoot at +1, then the last shoot as much as you could at the full +2. This potentially gave a great deal of damage, and let the prototype actually have a viable chance of hitting. Now though, it starts benefiting you right away. On the screen now, if we have the orange shots as misses and the yellow shots as hits, now you're ideally throwing away your lower value attacks right away. If you do hit, then great, you do some damage. But if you miss, then your next shot immediately gets more likely to hit. This turns them into an amazing unit to hunt down something high defense like the Devouring Eel, as missed shots rapidly stack up to counter that high defense. Their Walker also got some big changes to them. It had some AV nerfs to both sides and lost shielded, so it's much less of a tank now. It also lost some range on its battle cannon, down to only 28 inches. It also lost its old aura defensive protocols, but gained hold it steady on both sides. This makes it much more of a backline piece now, buffing the range of friendly missile actions taken near it. Lastly, Versatile Tactics is now glory only and once per duel. Its battle cannon also lost Relentless Assault trigger on the normal side, since it's not possible there anymore. Overall, the Mechanized Infantry and their Walker have a much more distinct identity compared to before. Now, they are all about their guns, blasting from long ranges and countering higher defense. They're also stepping on the Steel Legion's toes a lot less now too, with their lower speed and defensive AVs. The last change for Abyssinia is to the Lion among the Gazelles, which no longer goes back to your stratagem deck after use. This means Lord of Steel no longer gets 10 activations per game, which I think everyone will agree is probably a little more balanced. So that's enough about them, let's talk about King's Empire. I hope you have a full pot of tea on, because the Brits are back in business with a ton of buffs and streamlining. The biggest change by far is how they get to glory. Before, they had to kill a full fire team to flip to glory, which made it very difficult for their support pieces. Now they do it by succeeding in a post duel from their actions, and then discarding an Inspire token to flip after the action is done. I really like this, as it gives King's Empire players a choice. They now have to decide whether they want to use Inspire tokens to boost their AV for more likely success, or hold on to them to maybe have the chance to spend it to flip to glory. If you're able to stack multiple Inspire tokens on your unit, then of course you could spend one and keep the other to flip. Speaking of Inspire tokens, the King's Empire now uses them better than anyone else through their new ability, Sterner Stuff. This makes them treat Inspire tokens as a +3 AV boost instead of +2. They lost their universal trigger for it though, so they no longer have the same level of pin token spam. Bayonets and Rapid Maneuvering both lost some penalties, making your units feel a lot smoother across the board. Bayonets lost its -2 AV penalty, so now they're just as likely to hit when they're in melee as they are at range. Rapid Maneuvering is now available to all of their units instead of just squads, and traded out its requirement to discard a card for a -2 AV penalty. This means that shooting into combat with Rapid Maneuvering doesn't require a whopping 2 cards to even take the shot anymore, and being less likely to hit kinda makes more sense when you're running and gunning. The only other card that changed is the Royal Rifle Corps. To start, their Morale Action Noble Procession is a lot cleaner now. You can now use it anywhere on the board, but it's once per activation, and you have to choose whether to draw a card or pulse out Inspired tokens to other nearby units. This is a really strong support effect, but being once per activation ensures that they're still focused on offense. They also gained the Empire's formerly universal Hail of Gunfire trigger while in glory, so you can still spam out pin tokens just with this unit specifically. Lastly, they lost Point Blank, since Bayonets now gives them the same thing. Also, just to nip this question in the bud, Rayo still has Point Blank, since you can take him in 3 kingdoms where he wouldn't benefit from Bayonets unless you take the King's Empire Envoy card. Alright, and as we scroll down the rest of the page, you see a whole bunch of no changes, so... Expect my next video to talk more about this. The last page of the Errata covers some changes to the rulebook itself. A bunch of the changes are doubled up because their change impacts multiple sections. First, just as a reminder of how things used to be, penetration flips were always flipped and modified by the enemy of the fire team being hit, no matter what caused that penetration flip. But now, Hazardous is specifically called out as the only exception to this. For Hazardous, the affected fire team's player controls the penetration flip. This makes lower value cards in a player's hands much more useful now that you can cheat them in to avoid some Hazardous damage. This is definitely a nerf to Storm Siren, now that both she can't cheat the damage up, and her enemy can cheat the damage down. However, due to the sheer amount of Hazardous flips she can cause, it's really not as bad as it sounds at first. After all, your opponent will only have so many low cards in their hand to avoid the damage. Abyssinia, funnily enough, is now both stronger and weaker against Hazardous terrain. They'll have more low-value cards in their hand to cheat in, but since they have fewer low cards in their deck, the odds that they'll have to cheat are higher for them than for anyone else. The second change cleans up the wording about additional actions, confirming that additional actions can't make more of them by any means. This means there's no more debate on whether the Frenzy gets infinite attacks, with a firm no. The next one is pretty simple, but I think is very exciting. This adds in a new token type, Objectives tokens, which just gives them more space to do interesting things with new operations. The last change has you now determine the operation and deployment type before you pick your Legion's Envoy and Commander. This is actually the order that was already in the Fields of Glory, so this is just making it the case for all games instead of just in tournaments. This also gives you more control over what you end up taking, which is especially important when choosing your Envoy. If there's a certain unit that you'd want to take to deal with an operation, now you just can, instead of taking the Envoy just in case you end up in that operation. So that's it for the FAQ and Errata, just leaving us with a new Fields of Glory. The only change here is that we have 4 new operations to play. I'm not going to cover them all in detail here, but I do want to take a second to point out that Deliver Payload is Dodgeball, and I'm here for it. If you can dodge a bomb, you can dodge a ball. One final thing to call out is that Metalhead on Discord has put these changes into the other side's Vassal module, and DZ and Trick on Discord have done the same for the app, so be sure to update both of those to the newest versions. Alright, I'm going to call it there for the day. Lots of exciting changes, lots of older videos to update and remake. I wrote my Abyssinia video scripts before the FAQ and Errata dropped, and a ton of that needs to be totally rewritten now. But before I do more Allegiance deep dives, I'm going to cover some lore things first to mix it up a bit. I hope you enjoy those, and I'll try to release them not too far up from now. Until then, happy gaming!